Isabella Martinez gripped the steering wheel of her Honda Civic, her knuckles white against the black leather. The dashboard clock read 11:47 p.m. as she followed the taillights of her husband's BMW through the winding roads of Beverly Hills. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat echoing the growing dread that had consumed her for weeks. Marcus had said he'd be working late at the oil company headquarters downtown. Another board meeting, another crucial negotiation that couldn't wait until morning. She'd believed him just as she'd believed every excuse over the past 3 months. But tonight, something had snapped inside her. A desperate need to know, the truth that overrode her fear of what she might discover. The BMW's brake lights flashed red as it turned into the driveway of an imposing mansion nestled against the Hollywood Hills. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. She recognized this house from the society pages of Los Angeles magazine, the Whitmore estate, a sprawling Mediterranean villa that had belonged to one of California's most prominent oil families for generations. She parked across the street, her hands trembling as she watched Marcus step out of his car with the confident stride she'd fallen in love with 5 years ago. He was still devastatingly handsome at 38, his dark hair perfectly styled, his tailored suit emphasizing his athletic build. But now, watching him walk toward another woman's door, Isabella saw something different in his posture, a familiarity that spoke of countless previous visits. The front door opened before Marcus could knock, and Isabella's world tilted on its axis. Catherine Whitmore stood silhouetted in the golden light spilling from the foyer, her platinum blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, her figure elegant in a silk robe that probably cost more than Isabella's monthly salary as a high school Spanish teacher. But what made Isabella's stomach plummet wasn't just seeing her husband with another woman, it was recognizing Catherine as someone who had been at their wedding 3 years ago, sitting in the front row beside Marcus's best friend David Whitmore. Catherine was David's wife, and she'd smiled warmly at Isabella during the reception, complimenting her dress and welcoming her to their social circle with what had seemed like genuine kindness. Isabella watched in horrified fascination as Marcus pulled Catherine into his arms, their embrace intimate and desperate. They disappeared inside, leaving Isabella alone in her car, staring at the closed door of a world she'd never truly belonged to. The drive home to their Santa Monica condo passed in a blur. Isabella's mind raced, piecing together fragments of memory that now took on sinister new meanings. The late nights that had become increasingly frequent, the hushed phone calls Marcus would take in his study, the way he'd grown distant, his touches perfunctory, their conversations reduced to logistics about schedules and bills. She thought about their wedding day, how Catherine had been so charming, so welcoming, how she'd insisted Isabella call her Cat, and had promised they'd become great friends. The betrayal felt like a physical wound, not just from Marcus, but from someone she genuinely liked and trusted. Their condo felt different when Isabella finally walked through the door. The modern furniture Marcus had insisted on, the abstract art that meant nothing to her, the stark white walls that had never felt like home, it all seemed to mock her now. This wasn't her sanctuary, it was a stage set for a life that had been built on lies. Isabella sank onto the leather sofa, still wearing the jeans and sweater she'd thrown on when she'd decided to follow Marcus. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Maria in San Diego. "Hope you and Marcus are doing well. Can't wait to see you both at Mom's birthday next weekend." The normalcy of the message made Isabella want to scream. How could the world continue, spinning when hers had just shattered? She thought about her family, her parents who had worked double shifts at the restaurant to put her through college, her younger brother who looked up to Marcus like a hero, her grandmother who had given Isabella her own wedding ring to wear, saying it would bring her the same 50 years of happiness she'd shared with Abuelo. Marcus had swept her off her feet during her first year teaching at Westside Prep, where his younger sister Emma was a student. He'd shown up to parent-teacher conferences in place of his traveling parents, and Isabella had been charmed by his dedication to his sister's education. Their first date had been a simple dinner at a Mexican restaurant in Isabella's neighborhood, where Marcus had surprised her by speaking fluent Spanish and sharing stories about his business trips to Latin America. He'd seemed different from The wealthy men she'd occasionally encountered through her teaching job, more grounded, more interested in her thoughts and dreams than in showing off his success. When he'd proposed on the beach in Malibu, with the sunset painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Isabella had felt like the luckiest woman in the world. Now, staring at their wedding photo on the mantel, she wondered if any of it had been real. Had he loved her at all? Or had she simply been a convenient placeholder while he pursued something more exciting with Catherine Whitmore? The sound of Marcus's key in the lock sent Isabella's heart racing. She quickly wiped her eyes and pretended to be reading a magazine, though the words blurred together on the page. "Hey babe," Marcus said, loosening his tie as he walked into the living room. "Sorry I'm so late. The meeting ran longer than expected, and then David and I grabbed a drink to go over the Henderson contract." The casual mention of David's name made Isabella's stomach churn, but she kept her voice steady. "How is David? I haven't seen him and Catherine in ages." Something flickered across Marcus's face, too quick for Isabella to identify, but there nonetheless. "They're good. Actually, David mentioned we should all get together soon. Maybe dinner this weekend?" Isabella nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The audacity of it took her breath away. Was Marcus really suggesting they socialize with his mistress and her husband? The thought of sitting across a dinner table from Catherine, making small talk while Marcus and his lover exchanged secret glances made Isabella feel physically ill. "I'm pretty tired," she managed. "I think I'll head to bed." Marcus barely looked up from his phone. "I'll be up in a bit, just need to send a few emails." As Isabella climbed the stairs to their bedroom, she caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. Her dark hair was disheveled, her brown eyes red-rimmed from tears she'd tried to hide. At 29, she still looked young, but tonight she felt ancient, worn down by the weight of her discovery. In the bedroom they'd shared for 3 years, Isabella stood before her dresser, staring at the jewelry box Marcus had given her for their first anniversary. Inside were the pearl earrings he'd surprised her with on her birthday, the delicate gold bracelet from their second Christmas together, and tucked in the bottom corner, her grandmother's simple wedding band. She slipped the ring off her finger, for the first time since her wedding day, holding it up to the light. The gold was worn thin in places, a testament to decades of love and commitment. Her grandmother had told her that marriage was work, that there would be difficult times, but that love could overcome anything if both people were willing to fight for it. But what happened when only one person was fighting? What happened when the other had already surrendered to someone else? Isabella carefully placed the ring back in the jewelry box and closed the lid. Tomorrow she would have to decide what to do with this devastating knowledge. Tonight, she would try to sleep beside the man who had just shattered her world and somehow find the strength to face whatever came next. The next morning arrived with the merciless brightness of a California sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Santa Monica condo. Isabella had barely slept, her mind churning with images of Marcus and Catherine together, replaying every interaction she'd ever had with the Whitmore family through the lens of this new, devastating knowledge. Marcus was already gone when she woke, his side of the bed cold and empty. A note on his pillow read, "Early meeting with investors, home for dinner, love you." The casual normalcy of it made Isabella's chest tighten with a mixture of rage and disbelief. She called in sick to work, something she'd never done unless she was genuinely ill. But today, the thought of standing in front of 30 teenagers and pretending everything was normal felt impossible. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee that grew cold as she stared at her laptop screen, cursor blinking in the search bar. Whitmore Family Los Angeles yielded thousands of results. Isabella had known Marcus came from money. His family's oil company, Whitmore Energy, was one of the largest independent firms on the West Coast, but she'd never fully grasped the scope of their wealth and influence until now. Article after article detailed their business empire, their philanthropic endeavors, their sprawling properties from Napa Valley to the Hamptons. She found photos from charity galas and society events, images of Marcus's mother, Victoria Whitmore, a woman in her 60s who carried herself with the regal bearing of old money. Even in photographs, Victoria's steel-grey eyes seemed to look right through the camera with cool assessment. Beside her in many photos stood Marcus's older sister, Charlotte, a successful art dealer whose gallery in West Hollywood was frequented by celebrities and collectors. The younger sister, Emma, had followed a different path, becoming a pediatric surgeon at Cedars-Sinai. Isabella remembered meeting them all at the wedding, how polite but distant they'd been. She'd attributed their coolness to natural reserve, the way wealthy families sometimes guarded themselves around newcomers. Now she wondered if they'd simply never bothered to accept her because they'd known she was temporary, a placeholder, until Marcus found someone more suitable to their world. The doorbell rang, startling Isabella from her dark thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw a delivery man holding an enormous bouquet of white roses. Her heart skipped. Had Marcus somehow sensed her distress and sent flowers? But the card attached bore David Whitmore's elegant script. "Looking forward to dinner this weekend. Kat and I can't wait to catch up with you both. David and Catherine." Isabella stared at the flowers, their pristine beauty suddenly seeming obscene. Catherine had the audacity to send flowers while sleeping with Isabella's husband. The casual cruelty of it took her breath away. Her phone rang, displaying Marcus's number. Isabella let it go to voicemail, then immediately regretted it. Acting suspicious would only make things worse. She called him back. "Hey, sorry I missed your call," she said, proud of how normal her voice sounded. "No worries. I just wanted to confirm. Dinner with David and Kat Saturday night. I made reservations at Nobu." "Actually, I was thinking we could have them over instead. I haven't cooked in ages, and it might be nice to have a more intimate setting." There was a pause that stretched a beat too long. "That's a great idea, babe. I'll let David know." After they hung up, Isabella sat staring at her phone. She wasn't sure what had possessed her to suggest hosting dinner, but some instinct told her she needed to observe Marcus and Catherine together in a controlled environment. Maybe she'd imagined the intimacy she'd seen last night. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Even as she thought it, she knew she was grasping at false hope. The rest of the week passed in a strange, suspended reality. Isabella went through the motions of her normal life, teaching her classes, grading papers, chatting with colleagues, while internally feeling like she was watching herself from a great distance. Every interaction with Marcus felt loaded with hidden meaning. When he kissed her goodbye in the morning, she analyzed the pressure of his lips. When he asked about her day, she listened for distraction in his voice. Friday evening, Marcus came home with an expensive bottle of wine and seemed almost nervous, checking his phone repeatedly. "Everything okay?" Isabella asked. "Just work stuff. The Henderson deal is heating up, and there are a lot of moving pieces." But Isabella noticed how his jaw tightened when his phone buzzed, how he angled the screen away from her when he read his messages. Each small deception felt like another hairline crack in the foundation of their marriage. Saturday morning, Isabella threw herself into preparing for the dinner party with manic energy. She drove to the farmer's market in Santa Monica, selecting ingredients for paella, a dish that required hours of careful attention and reminded her of Sunday dinners with her family. The familiar ritual of cooking helped calm her nerves, though her hand still shook slightly as she cleaned the shrimp and seasoned the chicken. Marcus emerged from his study as she was setting the table with their wedding china, a pattern they'd chosen together at Bloomingdale's, dreaming of the dinner parties they'd host and the life they'd build together. "Smells incredible in here," he said, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. For a moment, Isabella allowed herself to lean into his embrace, to pretend they were still the happy couple they'd been just a week ago. "I wanted everything to be perfect," she said, and meant it in ways Marcus couldn't possibly understand. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Isabella smoothed her black dress, one Marcus had bought her for their anniversary, and opened the door to find David and Catherine Whitmore on her doorstep. David was Marcus's physical opposite, tall and lean, where Marcus was broad and muscular. His blonde hair and blue eyes a stark contrast to Marcus's dark coloring. At 35, he had the easy confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. He kissed Isabella's cheek with genuine warmth. "Isabella, You look absolutely radiant. Thank you so much for having us." But it was Catherine who commanded attention. At 32, she possessed the kind of effortless elegance that money couldn't buy but certainly helped refine. Her honey blonde hair fell in perfect waves, and her cream-colored dress looked deceptively simple until you noticed the way it moved with her body, revealing its expensive construction. She carried a bottle of champagne and a small gift bag. "Isabella." "Darling," Catherine said, air-kissing both of Isabella's cheeks. Her perfume was subtle and sophisticated, something French and probably worth more than Isabella's monthly salary. "I brought you a little something from that boutique you mentioned. Loving." Isabella didn't remember mentioning any boutique, but she accepted the gift with a smile that felt frozen on her face. Inside the bag was a silk scarf in shades of blue and gold, beautiful and undoubtedly expensive. "You shouldn't have," Isabella managed. "Nonsense. We're practically family, aren't we?" The words hit Isabella like a physical blow, but she maintained her composure as Marcus appeared with drinks. She watched carefully as he greeted Catherine, looking for signs of the intimacy she'd witnessed. But Marcus was the perfect host, attentive to both guests equally, his manner with Catherine appropriately friendly, but not overly familiar. Had she imagined it? Had her insecurities twisted an innocent encounter into something sinister? Over dinner, the conversation flowed easily. David regaled them with stories from his recent business trip to London. Catherine described the renovations she was overseeing at their Hamptons house. Marcus discussed the Henderson deal in vague terms, and Isabella found herself almost relaxing, lulled by the normalcy of it all. It wasn't until Catherine excused herself to use the restroom that Isabella noticed the subtle shift. Marcus's shoulders relaxed in a way they hadn't all evening. He checked his phone quickly, then looked toward the hallway where Catherine had disappeared. "The paella is incredible, Isabella," David said, oblivious to the undercurrents Isabella was beginning to sense again. "Kat's been trying to perfect her Spanish cooking, but she can't seem to get the rice right." "It's all in the timing," Isabella replied automatically, her attention focused on Marcus, who was still glancing toward the hallway. When Catherine returned, she complimented the bathroom's new hand towels, towels Isabella had never seen before. Marcus must have bought them specifically for tonight, she realized. Another small consideration that spoke of his desire to impress Catherine. As the evening wound down, Catherine insisted on helping clear the dishes, despite Isabella's protests. In the kitchen, she moved with surprising familiarity, knowing exactly which cabinet held the wine glasses and where Isabella kept the dish soap. "You have such a lovely home," Catherine said, her voice carrying that particular tone wealthy women used when they were being graciously condescending. "So cozy and intimate. David and I rattle around in that big house of ours. Sometimes I envy couples who can live so simply." The word simply hung in the air like a small insult wrapped in a compliment. Isabella's hands stilled on the plate. She was rinsing. "I suppose everyone has different needs," Isabella replied carefully. Catherine's smile was brilliant and sharp. "Absolutely. Some people are natural entertainers while others prefer a quieter life. Both have their place." As the Whitmores finally left, with promises to return the invitation soon, Isabella stood in her doorway watching their Tesla disappear. Down the street, Marcus came up behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. "That went well," he said. "I think Kat really likes you." Isabella turned to face her husband, studying his expression in the porch light. "Do you think so?" "Definitely. She was telling me earlier how much she admires teachers, how important the work you do is." When had Catherine told him that? Isabella had been present for the entire evening, and she didn't remember any such conversation. Unless they'd talked during one of the moments when Isabella was in the kitchen, or when David was monopolizing her attention with his London stories. "That's nice of her to say," Isabella managed. As they cleaned up the remainder of the dishes, together, Isabella found herself analyzing every word of the evening, every glance, every gesture. The certainty she'd felt after following Marcus began to waver. Maybe she'd misinterpreted what she'd seen. Maybe her own insecurities had painted innocent interactions with darker meanings. But as she was putting away the leftover champagne Catherine had brought, Isabella noticed something that made her blood run cold. The bottle was already open, though only slightly. The cork had been loosened and carefully replaced. Someone had opened the champagne before bringing it to her home. The realization hit her like a physical blow. They'd shared a drink before coming to dinner. Marcus and Catherine had been together earlier that evening, and then they'd sat at Isabella's table, eating her food, accepting her hospitality, all while hiding their betrayal behind masks of friendship and innocence. The champagne bottle sat on Isabella's kitchen counter like evidence in a crime scene, its loosened cork a silent testimony to the deception that had unfolded in her own home. Unable to sleep, she'd spent the night pacing between their bedroom and the living room, her mind replaying every moment of the dinner party with brutal clarity. By dawn, Isabella had made a decision that surprised her with its clarity. She would not confront Marcus, not yet. Instead, she would gather the truth methodically, deliberately. If she was going to dismantle her marriage, she would do it with facts, not just suspicions. Monday morning, Isabella called her principal and requested personal leave for the rest of the week. She'd never used her accumulated sick days, and Mrs. Henderson granted the request without question, expressing concern for Isabella's well-being that made her chest tighten with guilt. With Marcus at work, Isabella began her investigation. She started with his study, a room she'd rarely entered during their marriage. Marcus had always claimed it was too cluttered with work documents, too boring for her to find interesting. Now she wondered what else he'd been hiding behind that excuse. The desk drawers were locked, but Isabella found the key taped under the bottom drawer, a hiding place so obvious it spoke to Marcus's confidence that she'd never look. Inside, she discovered a treasure trove of information that painted their marriage in an entirely different light. Credit card statements revealed charges at restaurants she'd never been to, hotels during business trips that had lasted longer than Marcus had told her, and jewelry purchases from Tiffany & Co. that had never appeared on her finger. There were receipts from a spa in Carmel where Marcus had supposedly attended a weekend business retreat, but the charges were for couples treatments. Her hands trembled as she photographed each document with her phone, building a digital archive of betrayal. But it was a handwritten note tucked between the pages of a legal document that stopped her breath entirely. "My darling M," it read in Catherine's distinctive script. "Last night was everything I needed after the tedium of family dinner. Thank you for understanding when I get overwhelmed by playing the perfect wife. Our Thursday afternoons have become my sanctuary. All my love, C." Thursday afternoons. Isabella quickly checked the dates on Marcus's calendar and her own lesson plans. Every Thursday for the past 3 months, Marcus had claimed to have investor meetings that ran late, while Isabella taught her advanced Spanish literature class until 4 o'clock. The perfect window for an affair. But the legal document containing the note proved even more devastating. It was Marcus's will, updated just 6 months ago. Isabella scanned the pages with growing horror, realizing that despite 3 years of marriage, she'd been left nothing. Every asset, their condo, his stock options, his share of Whitmore Energy, even his car, had been bequeathed to his mother and sisters. Isabella wasn't just excluded, she'd been erased entirely. The message was clear. She was temporary, disposable, never truly considered family despite the vows they'd exchanged and the life they'd built together. She was a convenient wife for public appearances, but when it came to what really mattered, money, legacy, the future, she simply didn't exist. Isabella photographed the will with shaking hands, her vision blurred by tears of rage and humiliation. How long had Marcus been planning this? Had he ever intended their marriage to last? Or had she always been a placeholder until someone more suitable came along? The sound of the front door opening sent Isabella into a panic. She quickly replaced everything in the desk, locked the drawers, and raced to the kitchen where she pretended to be making lunch. "Hey babe," Marcus called out. "I came home for lunch. Thought we could spend some time together." Isabella's heart hammered as she forced a smile. "That's sweet. I was just making sandwiches." But as Marcus moved around their kitchen, chatting about his morning meetings, Isabella noticed things she'd somehow missed before. His phone, which used to stay casually on the counter, now remained in his pocket. When it buzzed, he'd glance at it with an expression she couldn't read, then quickly put it away. His wedding ring, which he'd worn proudly for 3 years, seemed looser on his finger, as if he'd been removing it frequently. "I was thinking," Marcus said, wrapping his arms around her from behind as she cut vegetables, "maybe we should take a vacation. Just the two of us. We could go to Napa or maybe that bed and breakfast in Mendocino you mentioned." The suggestion should have delighted her. 3 months ago it would have, but now it felt like another manipulation, another way to keep her distracted while he pursued his real relationship with Catherine. "That sounds lovely," Isabella replied, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. "When were you thinking?" "Soon. Maybe next month. I just feel like we haven't been connecting lately, and I want to fix that." The irony was so sharp it nearly made her laugh. Marcus wanted to reconnect with his wife while maintaining his affair with his best friend's wife. The compartmentalization required for such deception was breathtaking in its callousness. After Marcus returned to work, Isabella drove to Beverly Hills, parking across from the Whitmore mansion where she'd first witnessed the affair. She felt slightly ridiculous, like a character in a detective novel, but she needed to understand the scope of what she was dealing with. At 2:30 p.m., Catherine's white Range Rover pulled into the driveway. She was alone, dressed in yoga clothes. That probably cost more than Isabella's monthly grocery budget. Catherine disappeared inside, and 20 minutes later, Marcus's BMW turned into the same driveway. Isabella sat in her car for 2 hours, watching the house where her husband was, betraying her. When Marcus finally emerged at 4:45 p.m., his hair was mussed and his shirt wrinkled. Catherine appeared in the doorway wearing a silk robe, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. They shared a lingering kiss before Marcus got in his car and drove away. The sight should have broken Isabella's heart, but instead she felt something she didn't expect: relief. The uncertainty was over. She wasn't imagining things or being paranoid or insecure. Marcus was having an affair and she had proof. That evening, Marcus came home with flowers, not the expensive arrangements he'd once surprised her with, but grocery store tulips that looked like an afterthought. He was more attentive than he'd been in months, asking about her day, suggesting they watch a movie together, even offering to cook dinner. "You seem different today," Isabella observed as they sat on the couch together, Marcus's arm around her shoulders. "Different how?" "Happier, more relaxed." Marcus tightened his hold on her. "I've been thinking about what I said earlier, about us reconnecting. I realized I've been taking you for granted, and that's not fair to you. You deserve better." The words that should have been a balm instead felt like salt in an open wound. Marcus felt guilty about his affair, so he was temporarily showering her with attention to assuage his conscience. It was manipulation disguised as affection, and Isabella found it more insulting than his neglect had been. "I love you," Marcus said, kissing the top of her head. "I want you to know that." "I love you too," Isabella replied automatically, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. But as they sat together in the dim light of their living room, Isabella was already planning her next move. She'd discovered the affair and found evidence of her financial exclusion from Marcus's life. Now she needed to understand the full scope of her situation and determine what options she had. The next morning, while Marcus was at his regular golf game with David, the irony of which wasn't lost on Isabella, she drove to downtown Los Angeles to meet with Patricia Mendez, a divorce attorney she'd found online. Patricia specialized in high-asset divorces and had a reputation for protecting the interests of spouses who'd been financially marginalized. Patricia's office was in a gleaming tower in the financial district, her credentials displayed prominently on mahogany-paneled walls. She was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and intelligent dark eyes that reminded Isabella of her own mother. "Tell me about your situation," Patricia said, after Isabella had signed the confidentiality agreement. Isabella laid out everything she'd discovered, showing Patricia the photographs she'd taken of the financial documents and explaining what she'd witnessed. Patricia listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "How long have you been married?" Patricia asked. 3 years. "And you've been excluded from his will entirely?" "Completely. It's like I don't exist." Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying Isabella with an expression that was both sympathetic and calculating. "Mrs. Whitmore, excuse me, Mrs. Martinez, I need to be honest with you about what you're facing. Your husband comes from significant wealth, and families like his typically protect their assets very carefully. The fact that you've been excluded from his will suggests this was always their intention." Isabella's stomach dropped. "Are you saying I have no rights?" "Not at all. California is a community property state, which means you're entitled to half of any assets acquired during the marriage. The problem is determining what constitutes marital property versus separate property, especially when dealing with someone from a wealthy family." Patricia explained the complexities of divorce law when significant assets were involved, the importance of forensic accounting, and the likelihood that the Whitmore family would fight aggressively to minimize any settlement. "But there's something else you should know," Patricia continued. "I've handled several cases involving the Whitmore family over the years. They have a pattern of behavior when dealing with inconvenient situations. They're very good at making problems disappear quietly." "What do you mean?" "I mean they'll likely offer you a settlement that seems generous, but comes with strict confidentiality agreements. They'll want you to go away quietly without any scandal or public embarrassment." Isabella thought about the dinner party, about Catherine's subtle condescension, about Marcus's compartmentalized affection. "And if I don't want to go away quietly?" Patricia smiled for the first time during their meeting. "Then we prepare for war. But I want you to understand this won't be easy and it won't be pleasant. Families like the Whitmores have resources and connections most people can't imagine. They'll investigate your background, challenge your motives, and try to paint you as a gold digger who trapped their son into marriage." Isabella felt a familiar fire building in her chest, the same determination that had driven her to become the first person in her family to graduate from college, to build a teaching career despite her parents' fears about financial instability. "How do we start?" she asked. Patricia's smile widened. "We start by building our own case. Every document, every witness, every piece of evidence that proves the marriage was legitimate and that you contributed to its success." "And Mrs. Martinez?" "Yes? Don't let them know what you're planning until we're ready. The element of surprise will be crucial." As Isabella left Patricia's office, she felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Not hope for reconciliation. That ship had sailed. But hope for justice, for dignity, for the chance to walk away from this marriage with her head held high and her future secure. The game had changed and Isabella was no longer playing defense. 3 weeks had passed since Isabella's meeting with Patricia Mendez, 3 weeks of careful planning and meticulous evidence gathering. Every Thursday, she'd followed Marcus to the Whitmore mansion, documenting his visits with photographs and timestamps. She'd traced financial records, compiled witness statements from neighbors who'd seen Marcus's car at unusual hours, and even discovered hotel receipts from a weekend getaway to Carmel that had occurred during one of Isabella's teaching conferences. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Emma Whitmore, Marcus's younger sister. During their investigation, Patricia had uncovered something that changed everything: Marcus's grandfather's original will, filed with the Los Angeles County records decades ago. The document contained a provision that no one in the current generation seemed to remember. Any Whitmore family member who committed adultery would forfeit their inheritance rights, with those assets instead passing to their spouse. It was written during a different era, Patricia explained during their strategy meeting. Old William Whitmore was a strict Presbyterian who'd been devastated by his own son's infidelity. He wanted to protect future generations from what he saw as moral corruption. The irony was delicious. Marcus's betrayal hadn't just violated his marriage vows, it had potentially cost him his birthright. But Isabella knew that having legal leverage was only half the battle. The Whitmore family's power came from their reputation, their social connections, their carefully maintained image of success and respectability. If she wanted true justice, she needed to strike at the heart of that image. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Marcus announced that Whitmore Energy was hosting their annual charity gala at the Beverly Hills Hotel, a black tie event that raised money for children's education. It was the social event of the season, attended by Los Angeles' most prominent business leaders, politicians, and celebrities. "I want you to come," Marcus said, his enthusiasm genuine for the first time in months. "The whole family will be there, and I want them to see us together. I want them to see how happy we are." Isabella agreed, knowing it would be the perfect stage for what she had planned. The week before the gala, Isabella made preparations that would have impressed a military strategist. She arranged for copies of all her evidence to be delivered to key members of the Los Angeles media on the night of the event. She coordinated with Patricia to file divorce papers immediately after the public revelation. Most importantly, she'd convinced David Whitmore's business partner James Chen to attend the gala. James, who'd been quietly documenting financial discrepancies in several Whitmore Energy deals that suggested Marcus had been embezzling funds to finance his lavish lifestyle with Catherine. Isabella spent her last Whitmore family event getting ready with unusual care. She wore a stunning red dress she'd bought with her savings, not the conservative black gown Marcus had preferred she wear to such events, but something that commanded attention. Her dark hair was styled in an elegant updo, and she wore the diamond earrings that had been her grandmother's only valuable possession. They say Beverly Hills Hotel Ballroom was transformed into a glittering wonderland, with crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables decorated with white orchids and gold accents. Isabella recognized many faces from society magazines and business newspapers, tech moguls, oil executives, entertainment industry titans, and political figures who shaped California's economic landscape. Marcus looked devastatingly handsome, in his custom tuxedo, playing the role of devoted husband to perfection. He introduced Isabella to business associates with pride, his hand resting possessively on her lower back, his smile never wavering. If she hadn't known better, Isabella might have believed they were truly the happy couple they appeared to be. Victoria. Whitmore held court at the head table, resplendent in midnight blue silk and diamonds that had probably been in the family for generations. Her steely gaze swept the room with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect. Charlotte and Emma flanked her, both elegant in their own right, but neither possessing their mother's formidable presence. Catherine and David were seated at a nearby table, and Isabella watched with fascination as Catherine played her own role flawlessly. She was the devoted wife, attentive to David's needs, charming to their table mates, giving no hint of the deception she'd been orchestrating for months. Only Isabella noticed the meaningful glances she exchanged with Marcus when she thought no one was watching. The evening progressed through cocktails, dinner, and speeches about the importance of education funding. Isabella smiled and nodded at appropriate moments, made small talk with the wives of Marcus's business associates, and waited for her moment. It came during the silent auction, when the crowd was dispersed throughout the ballroom, examining donated items and placing bids. Isabella had positioned herself near the small stage where the evening's speakers had delivered their remarks, and she'd noticed the wireless microphone still active on the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," Isabella's voice suddenly filled the ballroom, amplified by the sound system. "I hope everyone is enjoying this beautiful evening celebrating education and children's futures." Conversations stopped, heads turned. Marcus, who'd been examining a golf package with several investors, looked up in shock. Victoria Whitmore's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as she realized something was terribly wrong. "My name is Isabella Martinez Whitmore," Isabella continued, her voice steady and clear. "I'm Marcus Whitmore's wife of 3 years, and I have something important to share with all of you tonight." Marcus started moving toward the stage, but he was too far away, blocked by tables and guests who'd turned their attention to Isabella. "You see, I've recently discovered that my husband has been living a double life. For the past 6 months, Marcus has been having an affair with Catherine Whitmore, the wife of his best friend and business partner, David Whitmore. The ballroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Catherine's face had gone white as marble, while David stared at his wife, in obvious shock. Marcus reached the stage, but Isabella stepped back from the podium, still speaking. "But that's not the most interesting part of this story," Isabella continued. "What's fascinating is that Marcus has been using company funds to finance his affair. Hotel suites, jewelry, spa weekends, all paid for with Whitmore Energy credit cards and justified as business expenses." Victoria Whitmore rose from her chair, her commanding presence cutting through the chaos. "Security," she called out, but Isabella wasn't finished. "I have documentation of every fraudulent expense, every forged receipt, every lie told to cover up this betrayal. And here's the truly ironic part. According to his grandfather's will, filed with Los Angeles County in 1962, any Whitmore family member who commits adultery forfeits their inheritance rights." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Marcus's labored breathing as he reached Isabella, but she was already stepping down from the stage, her mission accomplished. "Isabella, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Marcus hissed, grabbing her arm. "I'm telling the truth," she replied calmly, "something you seem to have forgotten how to do." The crowd parted as Isabella walked toward the exit, but not before she saw Catherine fleeing toward the ladies' room, David standing frozen in apparent shock, and Victoria Whitmore's face twisted with a rage that promised consequences Isabella couldn't yet imagine. Outside the hotel, Patricia Mendez was waiting with a team of process servers. The divorce papers were filed before the last guests had left the ballroom. By morning, the story would be front-page news in the Los Angeles Times business section, and Whitmore Energy's stock would begin its devastating slide. But the most satisfying moment came 3 days later, when Marcus appeared at their Santa Monica condo looking haggard and desperate. His family had cut him off financially, pending investigation of the embezzlement charges. Catherine had disappeared. According to David, she'd left for her sister's house in New York without any indication of when she might return. "Isabella, please," Marcus begged. "We can work this out. I made mistakes, but we can fix this." "No, Marcus," Isabella replied, standing in the doorway of what had once been their shared home. "We can't fix betrayal. We can't fix the fact that you never saw me as your real partner, never included me in your future, never respected me enough to be honest about what you wanted." "I love you," he said. And for the first time in months, Isabella believed he might actually mean it. "I know you do in your way," she replied. "But love without respect, without honesty, without partnership, that's not enough. It never was." The final revelation came during the divorce proceedings, when Patricia presented the court with evidence that changed everything. Hidden in the financial documents they'd subpoenaed was proof that Marcus had been planning to leave Isabella all along. He'd been gradually moving assets offshore, preparing for a divorce that would leave her with minimal settlement. The affair with Catherine wasn't just about passion. It was about positioning himself for a more advantageous marriage to someone the Whitmore family would actually accept as an heir. "He never intended the marriage to last," Patricia explained. "You were a temporary convenience while he worked out a long-term strategy." The truth was more devastating than Isabella had imagined, but it also freed her completely. Any lingering guilt about destroying Marcus's life, any second thoughts about her public revelation, disappeared in the face of this ultimate betrayal. The settlement, when it came, was far more generous than anyone had expected. The combination of California's community property laws, the embezzlement evidence, and the adultery clause in the grandfather's will created a perfect storm that worked in Isabella's favor. She received not just half of the marital assets, but a significant portion of Marcus's intended inheritance as well. More importantly, she'd exposed a pattern of financial fraud that led to federal investigations and ultimately brought down several corrupt schemes within Whitmore Energy. David Whitmore, once he recovered from the shock of his wife's betrayal, became an unexpected ally, providing additional evidence of Marcus's misconduct. 6 months after the gala, Isabella stood on the beach in San Diego, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson. She'd used part of her settlement to buy a small house near her family, and she'd returned to teaching at a local high school, where her students appreciated her passion for literature and her ability to relate to their struggles. Marcus had disappeared from Los Angeles society, reportedly living quietly in Oregon while attempting to rebuild his reputation. Catherine had filed for divorce from David and moved permanently to New York, where her family's connections had helped her start over. The Whitmore family had closed ranks around the scandal, but their empire had been permanently damaged. Isabella pulled her sweater closer against the ocean breeze and smiled as her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Maria. "Dinner at Mum's tomorrow. She's making your favorite mole." For the first time in years, Isabella felt truly free. She'd lost a marriage, but she'd found herself. She'd discovered that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined, braver than she'd thought possible, and worthy of the kind of love she'd once been willing to settle for less than. The waves crashed against the shore in their eternal rhythm, washing away the past and preparing the sand for whatever footprints the future might bring. Isabella breathed deeply, tasting salt and possibility in equal measure, and walked toward home. Fim da Historia. Dear listeners, we hope Isabella's journey of courage and self-discovery has moved you as much as it moved us. Her story reminds us that sometimes the greatest betrayals can lead to the most profound liberation, and that finding our strength often requires losing everything we thought we wanted. If this tale of resilience and justice resonated with you, we invite you to explore our carefully curated playlist of equally captivating stories by clicking to your left. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring you these powerful narratives of human complexity and triumph. We share new stories daily that explore the depths of relationships, the price of deception, and the courage it takes to rebuild our lives. Join the conversation in the comments below.